The 4th of August 2025. We're now well into the holiday season, and I should be making videos on things other than politics. But it's no harm just to give a little bit of a positive thing on the political situation too. Many people tell me they wouldn't have a clue what's going on, only for me. Some people say they'll go to bed at night to stick on Val for 20 minutes and see what's happening. And that's a sad reflection on our mainstream media. Sad reflection. But that is the situation. They're telling us lies and a wee bit of truth mixed in. Dreams come true. I suppose basically I'm what way would you put it? A conservative, somewhat light-hearted person. I believe that people can thrive better within a conservative government framework. That socialism has been proved to be a swindle, and always was, and that people who believe other swindles tend to be socialists. If you look at the United States, the ones who want men boxing women in a boxing ring are always socialist. They're always Democratic Party supporters. The ones who believe we're going to fry in a couple of weeks' time from climate change are always socialists. And these people kept telling us during the Soviet era that we had to love the communist Russia. That Mao Zedong, the communist leader of China, was a great man. And in between was the churches, which were a mix of socialism, love your neighbour, and also they allowed some of the most awful tyranny to be inflicted, particularly in Ireland. And I'll let you see where I'm coming from. I was born after the Second World War, but I had enough of people living with me and around me to tell me all that happened. I was well versed in it. We know Hitler was a socialist. That socialism is always the carrot that's dangled in front of voters to get dictators into power. And Keir Starmer is a typical example of that. However, socialism doesn't mean it can't be a type of nationalism. Socialism tends not to have the country on top. In other words, a socialist won't say, I love Ireland, I love Britain, I love France. A socialist will not do that. He'll say, I hate Russia, I hate China, I hate the United States. To get the point, the difference in my type of a conservative is I will put my own place first. The socialist puts no value on his home turf at all, but he hates a certain other entity that's a threat to him. That's a theory I have there. Debate it if you wish. I'm just going to put it to you. But as I was growing up, I became to realise that over the last 200 years, or 150 years, let's say, there were certain evils in the world. And there were certain remedies to it. And some of the remedies were moderate and some were excessive. The royalty in France had no regard for the well-being of their people. They never tried to get sympathy or empathy or try to help their people along the way they should have. And so the people decided to dump them out. But I would have just replaced them with a proper government, but they had the guillotine and they cut the heads of thousands of people. And this is the excess, that when you go to get rid of the hated thing, that you often install something which is equally as bad. And then Napoleon arose from that in France and ended up invading Russia. What did Russia do on him? And then he met the British. The British decided to give him a bloody nose in a European battle for dominance, and they beat him at the Battle of Waterloo, commanded by a man who was born in Trim in County Meath in Ireland. Napoleon had a terrible death. He lived on an island away out in the Atlantic and just rat infested and everything. But anyway, that's another day's work. So I could see that there wasn't much in the old France, and the new France wasn't much better. The British held on to their monarchy through all kinds of things. I don't know how they managed it, but it was a skill. And but the monarchs with the British, they did tend to come down to the people level. They did tend to get mixed with the ordinary Joe. And they had an award system where you could become a sir for doing something good in that. But in any event, they managed to survive one way or the other in Britain. Now, Ireland got its independence, and its leader, the man that might have kept us on the straight and narrow, was Michael Collins, and they killed him straight away. And Sinead, that's another story. And then we were left with a mishmash. And one of the things that happened when the new state took over in Ireland was they handed everything to the Holy Roman Catholic Church. And there was a Eucharistic Congress in 1932, 10 years after the founding of the state. And thousands of people went. In the Phoenix Park, thousands of people went. I knew a man who died a couple of years ago who was at it. And he remembered that the toilets were inadequate. They didn't have the wit to put equal a number of toilets for women as men, and they had to take over some of the men's toilets to allow the women go to the toilet. That Eucharistic Congress was a big event, and it married nationalism to the church. And when the church got power, you see what it did. Now, many church leaders did say the Eucharistic Congress had a negative effect. It encouraged young men to go to the church. There was a feeling in Ireland that if you had a son got into the church, that was a clear bill of health, because the church always examined the mental condition of the families. To this day, a person joining the army as an officer in the army, not as an ordinary private, will have his family background checked for mental illness. Connections with the IRA are subversive a bit as well, not as much as it was. Anyone applying for the Guards will have their family assessed for mental illness, and anyone applying for the church to be a priest will have the family assessed for mental illness. And so having a son a priest meant that you were cleared. You had an official stamp on your family that you weren't mentally ill. Anyway, they got an awful lot of recruits that couldn't handle them. They had to go over and try to convert the black fellas in Africa, the African people. And they had missions. And there was priests anywhere the white people settled. They wanted a priest, and the Irish priest went out. There was a man born about three quarters of a mile from here, and he served in New Zealand. I remember him home. He served in New Zealand all his life in New Zealand. Another man became a priest from about 2 miles from here. About 2.25 miles as the crow flies, little house still there, and he is a priest and has been a priest in Texas all his life. So that was what Ireland was doing. But meanwhile, you had the Magdalene laundries. Any girl that got pregnant had the priest calling. In some cases, they would call on bicycles. Now, those of you who know about bicycles will know that a lady's bike has no bar. A man's bike has a bar going across from the saddle to the handlebars. And the lady's bike has not. It's a sweep down to let her get her legs in across. There's a difference in a lady's bicycle and a man's bicycle. They didn't want them having to throw the leg across the saddle, obviously. But anyway, the priest often called for them and took the girls away, and they used to put them sitting on the bar of the bike and them pregnant and bring them away. And they put them into various laundries and things and various institutions. There was a place in Coole in Westmeath, and there's now a big hubbub over the Tuam baby home over there, where there's thousands of babies buried in a plot. I don't know whether they killed or did they die or whatever, but once they died, they were just tipped in, and that was that. There's a lot of effort gone into that. I will not go there. There's enough of people paid for it without me. I want to change the future if I can. So I began to say, in my early days, I looked at Cuba. I felt, the first thing was I read history. I was glad that the North won the American Civil War, because to me that ended slavery, which was an abominable practice. An abominable practice. Could be a man and a woman slave there, and the wife might be pregnant, and they take the wife away and sell her off. And he couldn't protect his own family. That should never have been the case, but that's what grew America. That's what got America into the strength it was in, was slavery. Beating people till they worked and kill them if they didn't. So there was a few films on that. One was Drum was the name of it. But I anyway wished that I was glad that the Americans won the North won the war in America. I was very upset that they took the land of the Native American people without any proper sympathy or empathy. They signed treaties which they broke. Now, of course, Americans will say we couldn't have left the Indians in charge of the whole place. You'd have no country, and that's true. But the secret of it was to do it in a way that let the natives integrate. And today the natives are there, and they're kind of half separate, and they have events. And I have attended their powwows and their gatherings and all. So they still survive a bit. Probably if it was a communist government in America, they'd have killed them all. But they killed a lot of them anyway. But anyway, I was glad to see America coming up, and it was obvious to me that the freedom in the American Constitution, starting with we the people, was what was building this country and what made it a magnet. You had freedom. You had no monarchy, you had no king, you had no order of merit, you had no sir, you had no noble lords or anything like that. So that's the way that went. But it was good to see that happening. The next thing was I knew the Soviet Union was there, and it had a gulag where it froze people to death in Siberia, and I wanted the end of it. I could see Chairman Mao blowing his trumpet with his communism and killing people and cultural revolutions. I later saw Pol Pot in Vietnam or wherever he was, Cambodia, killing all around him just to prove a point. Skulls, buckets of skulls, lorry loads of skulls, all people. So that type of dictatorship I hated, and I don't like it in North Korea either. But I wished for it to be gone. Cuba, I'd like to see its people free. I'm a long time wishing to see Cuba get rid of its dictators, but I'll wait another while it would appear. It's amazing that you can have an island like Cuba where it is and still running under the communist yoke like North Korea. But that's the way it is. But slowly but surely, anyway, we did get rid of stuff. The Berlin Wall ended. It was taken down by sheer people power. Their efforts to separate the people of Germany failed. And that was good. And then the European Union was proposed. And it looked good to me, and I supported it and voted for it. The idea was that Ireland could be in a better negotiating position as a collective with Germany, France, Italy, with proper rules to make sure nobody dominated, than it would on its own. So, for example, when there'd be trade negotiations, which is what the EU is primarily set up on, when there was trade negotiations, well, they could come to an agreement and be a strong hand. And then I began to see that the EU was launching an attack on the environment. I read its regulations, I read what it offered before the various referenda, including the Lisbon Treaty, Single European Act and all, and it promised to give laws to protect the environment. And those laws then were broken. They wrote the directives in ways that allowed get-out by judges appointed by the states, and they simply flouted a lot of the laws they wrote themselves. You know, I have a BME bonnet about the SCA directive, and there's a get-out clause in it that it doesn't include budgetary matters, but it doesn't define it. Proper law would explain what that means. So the citizen has to go to court to see what the court thinks, the court in Luxembourg thinks. The EU has fined Ireland for breaking some environmental laws like Derry Bryan Wind Farm, but it hasn't engaged properly on the overall planning programme. It hasn't forced them to check and plan and analyse with public participation everything that it intends to do. It has just allowed them to pass it over. And that's done with the full authority and connivance of the European Union. And there's no redress so far after years of fighting it. So then, when you see what happened, when you see the way these totalitarian states evolve, we then look at this European Union and we realise that in fact it's a scam. And when they got in, they appointed Ursula von der Leyen, a German woman, and they drew up the parameters that allowed Germany to come to the top. Germany had been kept down since the Second World War, highly dangerous to let it militarise, and here we are now with everything going into the German military. People who have worked in Ireland, in France, in Italy, put in their bit into the state funds, built up their reserve of money for their pension and their good health and their retirement, find that they're being told to have to work another 10 years, and the whole money's going into Ukraine, and that's not even a member of the EU, and the whole money's going into militarisation. And so the bottom line with all that is that it's turning the people against the EU. And slowly but surely, people like me, and they often say to me, my critics, what are you going to do about it? Slowly but surely, we're bringing the people around. Instead of liking the EU, and where I was, 20 years ago, where I was favourable to the EU, we're bringing it around to hating the EU, which will lead to its ultimate collapse. But like all collapses, like the collapse of the Catholic Church, when the Church collapsed, it brought in an era of wokeism, communism, World Economic Forum, more horrible than anything the Church had to offer. And so I said, stop, you're gone far enough. You're gone far enough. And just like in America, the people of African descent who were slaves were freed, and then the next thing was get them on, give them a bit of a leg up there and let them integrate into society. But it got to the stage that they began to rule the roost. You had Black Lives Matter. You had a policeman killed a black man or a black man died, and there was holy war. And so the black people of Africa, instead of being part of the society, only some of them, wanted to be running the society. The gender equality took growth, and instead of being given fair play and let live, they wanted to be tops. They wanted to be tops in government. They wanted to be tops in the military. So you're going over to fight the Russians in Ukraine with a general who's wearing fishnet tights and an artificial breast pumped into him and castrated. And this is the lad they want. So that is not sustainable at all. But I said, hold on, you're gone too far. So you see the way it goes like a pendulum. It's too much one way, and then it goes the other way. And that's a big fault of democracy, I have to say. The same with the energy. Again, the climate change. What they're trying to do now is they're trying to force their climate change agenda on the whole world with carbon taxes and all of that. And I have to interject here and say, Ireland is currently flying. You can't, anyone that has hands on them to do work, you're as busy as a bee. And it's now coming to a problem with bad German cars and bad European cars, you can't get mechanics. But they're printing money. A lot of the money that's going spent on renovations is printed. And then a lot of it is spent by governments on migrant centres, which shouldn't be coming in at all. And so you see Trump put the brakes on. Now he has the migration reduced. I think there was only 9 in 1 month there recently. Only 9. So he's proven you can stop the migration. Without Trump, you'd never be able to prove it. And so the Europeans see this and they can't use it as an excuse anymore. You don't always have to gain something to prove a point. And it's like the Irish Freedom Party. It went for election, the last election in November 2024. We may not have got a TD, but we proved the Irish people were liars. Because they always told us we have no one to vote for. Who have we? Sinn Féin, Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael. People before profit, Labour. And we gave them an alternative, which would be similar somehow to the American Republican Party or to the party of Donald Trump or Donald Trump himself. And they rejected us. They did vote a bit, but they didn't give us enough. So that's the proof. That's the proof. So we proved that the Irish people were liars. And I love to use that word. That's what they were. They were lying to us when they told us at funerals and wakes and weddings and meetings, we have no one to vote for. You had and you didn't do it. That's the way it is. Now, so what will happen? Well, my wishes are the complete destruction of the European Union. But I do know that it would be nice for Ireland to have connections with Bulgaria, with Hungary, even with Germany. There's good people in it too. And with Italy, a lovely country too, and all of that. But whether we do or not is not a big deal for me. The main thing is to destroy Europe, destroy, to bring it down. Nigel Farage realised the harm it was doing and he got the British people to vote for Brexit. Keir Starmer is trying to unwind that, but he's not going well. Not going well. be right. They should not get involved in the Ukraine. And if they hadn't, you would have Russia would have won, and they'd have some type of a government in there, and things would be all right, and the Ukrainian people would have been better off. But that's the way it turned out. So what I'm saying to you is, if I look back over my lifetime and the things I wished for, a lot of them have come to pass, slowly but surely. And usually they came to pass too much. They go too much. It's too much against me, and then it's too much for me. We want the centre ground, slightly right of centre, if you want to use that word. And therefore, it looks like that. Now, if you think that the idea of the European Union was to give strength through the whole lot being together, 27 member states meeting Trump on tariffs, that completely collapsed. That whole idea that was pushed over, that Ireland and Britain, Ireland and France and Italy can form one cohesive unit with Germany and say, these are things that's not acceptable to us. They didn't. Not only that, Trump didn't even come to Germany or to France. He insisted that Ursula von der Leyen and her team come up to his Turnberry golf course in Scotland, because he didn't want to be meeting that allegiant Sigmund Can. But wouldn't you think those negotiations would have taken place in somewhere in Europe? But no, in his private hotel. And he just gave them a list of demands and said that's that. And they caved in. So here is the people who was telling us how to live, and they couldn't deal with Trump at all. They capitulated 100%. And when you think of it, in the deal might still be adjusted, is a 50% tariff on steel. And yet some of the most finest steels are produced in Sweden and Czechoslovakia. These are very fine steels. But these are not exempted. So if an American company wants to use them for surgical equipment, we'll say prison steel is steel that's very hard to cut for prisons. They have to pay a 50% tariff. What is the benefit to America in that? Yet it's happening. So you get me point. We're all upwards and onwards. The next thing we want is Starmer gone out of England. Nigel Farage running England. I know people will say, oh, you don't know much about him. I don't care what he is. He'll stop this madness. And the next thing is more pressure will come on that silly woman, Ursula von der Leyen. But one thing we won't stop now, and that's the rise of Germany militarily. They rose under the Kaiser, they rose under Hitler, and they'll rise again. When you consider Spain has 25% unemployment, 25% unemployment, and how did they vote? Socialist. Vote for socialist that believes the climate change and all that caused the unemployment. And Trump knew well that no matter what he did for Europe, they were going to vote comical, as to say, and the Irishman will vote funny. You can never do a deal with the voters in any of these countries. They'll always let you down. They wouldn't elect Churchill after the Second World War, after him winning the war for them. So you get me point. So I think you're going to see the gradual rise of these BRICS nations, maybe not with India, but with Indonesia and other places. You're going to see Trump putting tariffs on Russia. He's going to put tariffs, secondary tariffs. I don't think that's going to work. In other words, those who buy the oil of Russia and the gas will have to pay tariffs. We'll see how that'll work, and that'll be the subject of a new video. But I think the genie is out of the bottle. The Western system in Europe killed itself with silliness, with silly Billy women and men. Silliness. And America did the same until Trump got in, but when Trump tried to put the brakes on, it was gone too far, and even Trump doesn't understand the economics of world power and sanctions at all. Putin is slowly but surely taking over Ukraine, and I'm inclined to think he'll end up with at least half of it under firm control with no let out, and maybe even he might take over it all. To finish, folks, I'll leave it at that because there's other issues I want to mention. So now you get the general view. I think what I always wish for will come to pass. I mightn't see the day myself, but if I live as long as my father, I'll see the European Union smashed. Will voters come over? They're moving over in France and Germany There'll not be enough of them. And anyway, they're banning them. They have Marine Le Pen banned in France from running for election, the second most important candidate in the last election. So they'll kill democracy. Nothing surer. The first thing Hitler did was kill democracy, and they'll kill it. And when Churchill was put out after the Second World War, the British government accepted it, and the King accepted it. Nowadays, that wouldn't be accepted. Folks, comment underneath. I hope that's a reasonably good talk. I'm sorry it's holiday time, but we just need to get a kind of a handle on what's happening. Yes, our economy in Ireland is booming. You can't get workers, skilled workers. Well, what does that say about Ireland? Why wasn't Ireland training its workers? What was it doing 15 years ago? Had it courses for people? I don't think it had. And I think we're now in a position that we can't get the people with the skills to do what we want. We'll see you back. And as somebody said there, it's Indians that's teaching electronics in the colleges. Indian people. It's not Europeans at all. They're all dumbed down. They can't talk about capacitors because they can't do the figures. It's fellas from India. Whether that's good or not, I don't know. But that shows you the situation. That'll give you all grounds for comment underneath. Ukraine has lost the war. That's over. We'll see you back. See you. Thank you. Bye.